join in. So thanks for everyone attending. My name is Rob Burnett. I'm with Netcapital. We have here Karl from Mercurius Biorefining. Karl, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
We're excited to hear from you. So the way this will work for all the attendees so they can know is I'll ask a series of questions. I'll MC. If any investors have any questions of Karl about the company or anything else, feel free to ask them in the Q&A function, and I'll pepper those questions in kind of whenever it's appropriate to do so. So with that, Karl, why don't you start off by giving us a brief overview of the company?
Sure. So Mercurius Biorefining has been around since 2009, and so 10 years ago now. And we've been developing what we think is a breakthrough technology that efficiently and with low cost converts biomass, any kind of biomass, anything with cellulose in it, which is a lot of things around the world. It converts that into a drop-in jet fuel and diesel fuel. And then we can also make other products that could be higher value, like go into better plastics or better coatings and a lot of other possibilities that we can also make with our technology. So it's important, I think, for the world to have a low-cost producer of cellulosic biofuels, and we aim to be that company.
Great. And just a point of clarification: when you say drop-in, what exactly does that mean?
Sure. It means that the fuel is substantially the same as the fuel made from petroleum. So for jet fuel and diesel, these materials, these compounds that we make, and every once in a while I'm going to geek out on you because I'm a chemical engineer from the oil industry. So
fair enough.
Let me know if I go too far, but it's the similar compounds that are in jet fuel and diesel that are made from oil. So you can put them into the infrastructure, into the pipelines, into the engines, and certainly in the case of diesel, directly without any changes. So that can be important to integrating these fuels into the existing infrastructure, which, billions of dollars of assets have been built up to build this infrastructure, and then we'll be able to basically drop right into that.
Great.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the team that you've assembled over at Mercurius, and what are the backgrounds, what makes you all unique?
Yeah, so I'll start with myself. I'm a chemical engineer. I worked in the oil industry most of my career. I mostly in oil refining, so I did the operations and technical services and process design work for oil refineries. And then sort of towards the end of that stint, I got into planning and economics, which I felt really comfortable with and I really enjoyed, and I did pretty well out, to pat myself on the back. But that really informed how I looked at biofuels. I wanted to see something that was similar process-wise to what was done in oil refineries, because oil refineries are gigantic and been scaled to big sizes. So it'd be good to be able to leverage that previous experience and bring that into a biofuels technology. And a lot of the other, frankly, we'll get into it a bit later, I'm sure, but a lot of the other technologies really aren't like that. They're quite a bit different than what we do in oil refineries every day. So I was glad to see when I found this technology that it did remind me of quite a bit of what we do in oil refineries, and I think we're going to benefit from that. So, I've got a real strong process background and economics background, operation economics background in the oil industry. So that really helps me, this new endeavor, this new gig I have to start up a biofuels company. The other principals that have been around since the beginning are Michael Vivera, who is our CFO. And Michael has started companies in Japan and Australia and the US. And he lived in Japan for 10 years and started his own company, which is a tough thing to do for an American. So very ambitious and well done by Michael. And then in Australia, he also started up a business. Lived there for 10 years, and he came back to the US, and he's been working with Mercurius after he'd been back a couple of years, he started working for us, and he's bringing that startup experience and finance experience, and just general business experience to bear, helping Mercurius build up our company. And then Knud Boslev, who I believe is online, so hi Knud, but he is our guy from Europe. Basically, he is keeping track of opportunities in Europe for strategic partnerships or investment, and not just Europe, but also all around the world, because he's good at making connections and bringing companies and potential strategic partners, to bringing Mercurius to their attention and helping us network the company and bring in investment and strategic partnerships.
Great. And so most companies are born out of trying to solve a problem. So can you talk to me about the kind of problem that Mercurius is trying to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important part of the reason I got into it. I mean, everybody wants to make money, so that's, kind of one thing you want to do, but I think it's an important mission that we're on, because climate change is getting more and more accepted as a real problem in the actually fairly near future, right? And there's already some effects that we're feeling now from climate change. So we need to mitigate climate change. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, a lot of different sectors that need to be decarbonized. The transportation sector is an important one that we have to decarbonize, and biofuels are always going to be really important for decarbonizing transportation. Everybody's heard of electric cars and solar and wind farms, and that's all great, but it's very difficult to electrify heavy transport. So like big ships and airliners and diesel long transport shipping, trucking, I should say. Those are all difficult to put under battery power just because of the physics of it. And so that's where biofuels are going to be important to lower the carbon footprint of those important transportation sectors. So we think that's the need that we're filling, because I think, like I mentioned before, the world is going to need a way to decarbonize the transportation sector, and we're going to be an important part of that.
Great. And I think it's perfect time to transition into your solution. So why don't you talk to me about the product itself and what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, so our technology is called REACH technology, and REACH stands for Renewable Acid Hydrolysis Condensation Hydrotreating. So it's an acronym talking about the 3 steps of the process. The first step is acid hydrolysis. So we basically use acid to break down the biomass, and we make this intermediate that's called CMF, chloromethylfurfural, for any of the chemists or chemical engineers that might be on. And then we turn that into compounds that are good for the next step, which is condensation reaction. So it's not like condensing vapor, condensing steam or anything. It's an actual reaction. It's a term for a type of reaction that puts 2 or 3 of these compounds together to get and I'm going to, be my chemical engineer from their oil refinery a bit, but you want to get a carbon chain length where it's suitable for jet fuel and diesel. So it puts it into the boiling range that you want for jet fuel and diesel. And then you take those condensation products and you hydrodeoxygenate them. So you use hydrogen to take all of the oxygen out, and you're left with what's called a hydrocarbon, which is very similar to hydrocarbons that make up jet fuel and diesel from petroleum. So that's our technology. We think we have a lot of advantages with that technology. So I could go into that, where just a little primer on other technologies.
Yeah.
There's 2 different main categories of biofuels, cellulosic biofuels in particular, and those are biotechnologies. So they use biochemical solutions. They use, you know, microbes to ferment cornstarch into ethanol, for instance. That's a biochemical type of biofuel. And if you want to make cellulosic ethanol, for instance, you have to turn the cellulose into sugars first and then ferment that to ethanol, whatever alcohol you're trying to make. And then the other type is thermochemical, and basically you vaporize the biomass or you gasify it, you know, you kind of partially burn it, and then you manipulate that product to make biofuels. So both of those have issues. Our type of technology doesn't really fit into either of those categories very well, so we kind of made up our own category. It's called liquid phase catalytic. So we use liquid phase when we when we process the biomass. We don't gasify it or, you know, or pyrolyze it to vapor or anything like that. So therefore the equipment can be smaller because it's this more dense material you're moving around, and you don't have to have these big pipes and equipment to handle the vapor. So that reduces our capex. And then on the other side, the biochemical, those are slow processes because it just takes microbes a long time to do their work. It takes a long time to ferment, you know, malt into beer, you know, with the yeast. So it's similar with the biochemical types of biofuels processes. So you have these really long residence times, and as you can imagine, that means the equipment has to be a lot bigger, again, higher capex. So we have an inherent advantage on capex because we're liquid phase and we're catalytic. So we're fast. We're not 2 or 3 days or more in a fermentation vat. We're at maybe 2 hours, and then we don't have to handle all the vapor like the thermochemical guys. So that's, I think, our big advantage on the capex. Feedstock flexibility is also an important advantage that comes in on capex and opex because we're feedstock flexible, so we don't have to you know, have specific feedstocks. We can change feedstocks in the process and without any, you know, major issues. We don't have to grind it up as much, which is important for capex and opex. We can have, you know, bigger sizes material we put into the process. We can handle feedstocks that are wet or wetter than other technologies can handle, so you don't have to dry it first, or you can, you know, be able to buy cheaper feedstocks because they're wet. So there's a lot of advantages on the opex and capex side for that. So that's a, you know, I guess a quick overview of our advantages over our competitors and why we think that this is going to be a very important technology in the future.
Yeah. And so speaking of kind of your competitors and what does the market look like, can you talk to me about the market? How big is it for your products? And, you know, like, what are the big barriers to adoption at this point?
Yeah, you know, in a word, the market's huge. As you think, when you think about it, liquid fuels are, I think it's like 220 billion gallons a year in the US only. And then you can talk about addressable markets in the US. There was a renewable fuel standard that we're quite a ways into now that was passed 10 years ago or something like that. And they called for advanced biofuels, which, you know, we would fit into that category, of about 20 billion gallons a year. So still a lot of gallons even in the you know, advanced biofuel category of this giant liquid fuels market. And then of course the rest of the world has, you know, demand to add on to that. So it's just a really, really huge market. As far as trying to break into that market, you know, the petroleum industry has been around a long time. They have a lot of money. They're sort of entrenched in what they do, and they want to keep doing what they do. So they're not, you know, in a big hurry to embrace new technologies that will replace, you know, their core products. And so that's a big barrier to entry. And I think the only way you're going to get around that is with policies that are going to, you know, force people to burn fuels that are lower carbon footprint because it's the right thing to do.
Great. And you know, what markets are you going to target first, like as you start to reach out?
Yeah, so for jet fuel, obviously the airlines are interested in decarbonizing as much as they can, and a big part of their carbon footprint is jet fuel. And there's not going to be electric jets anytime soon that are of any size or consequence for reducing greenhouse gases. So that's a really good one to target for jet fuel. For diesel, we're going to be able to sell diesel sooner than we'll be able to sell jet fuel, just because of all the certification you have to go through for jet fuel, which all makes sense, of course. For diesel, I think fleets, big diesel fleets. You can imagine a FedEx or other companies that have big fleets of trucks that would be interested in lowering their carbon footprint with cellulosic diesel. And obviously, sort of the conduit between us potentially and these customers would be an oil company. Certainly, we'd like to partner with an oil company, and I think that day will come. We've had good discussions, but haven't got to that point yet. But there's some of that happening, and I think we'll kind of get our chance.
And this is a good time to talk about. Can you talk about your progress so far? At what stage is Mercurius at, and what are the next major milestones?
Sure. We are building a pilot plant right now, and that pilot plant's going to be located in Queensland, Australia. I get a lot of airline miles, but that's not the reason we're doing it, certainly. We are, been fortunate to get a lot of support from the state of Queensland in the form of grants, and also from the federal government. We're looking in Australia to get some other grants to help us pay for the pilot plant project. And that'll be, it's in the design phase right now, and we hope that will be started up in September. So that's going to be a big milestone for us, starting that pilot plant up. Really looking forward to getting that operating and scaling up our technology. And then really the biggest milestone coming up would be when we're done with the pilot plant project. In other words, we've run different feedstocks, we've figured out the process, we've optimized everything, and now we're ready for the next phase, which is a demonstration plant. So it's going to be a bigger plant that we can then scale to commercial size with, and that'll be hopefully following on very quickly after a successful pilot plant project, which we could wrap up by first quarter next year, and we could be moving into a demonstration. So that's kind of an idea of our commercialization roadmap as we see it.
Great. And can you talk to me about kind of the business model? How are you, as you go through these phases and these plants, how is the company planning on making money?
Yeah, the people have asked me that a lot, and my dream scenario is Mercurius owns and operates biorefineries all over the world. I mean, that's what I would like to see. And you can make quite a bit of money in fuels due to markets like California, which I should talk about that a bit, maybe more of a market discussion, but it reminds me to discuss that. So in California, there's a $1 or maybe even more a gallon that you can get from the Renewable Fuel Standard credits. They're called RINs from the federal government. And then there's low carbon fuel standard policy that's been in place for several years now that can add another $1.50 or more. So you can be up to $3 a gallon credit for a fuel, and that's before you even have the value of the fuel itself. So if the fuel is worth $2, compared, pricing it off of petroleum diesel, for instance, then it could be worth $5. So you can see where, if you're a low-cost producer like us, maybe it costs us $1.60 a gallon to make a cellulosic diesel. If we send it to California, we can get $5 a gallon, essentially. So could be very profitable. And so that's how, that's how we think we're going to make money by, building and operating biorefineries. There's also, obviously, there's opportunities that we might have in certain countries to have joint ventures, possibly licensing the technology directly to somebody in certain countries. That's all, we're all very willing to talk about all those possibilities. And, we think it's going to be kind of all the above strategy once we get into commercialization.
Sure. And just a reminder to the attendees, we're coming towards the end of the questions. So if anyone's got any questions of Karl, feel free to submit them now. But yeah, Karl, as you look ahead, do you see, you talked about kind of owning and operating refineries yourself. Do you think that there's other opportunities for either strategic partnerships or acquisitions, et cetera?
Absolutely. So, another scenario that could play itself out certainly would be a petroleum company may want to acquire us, or maybe if we're making biochemicals or chemicals that are higher performing, maybe a polymer company or a chemical company could be interested in acquiring certain parts of our business, joint ventures, partial buyouts, IPOs. Those are all somewhere in our future, I imagine. And so I think there's plenty of ways that when we're successful and we own and operate several biorefineries, that there could be, it could be good for our early investors, certainly.
Great. Well, as we wrap up here, are there any kind of parting thoughts or final things you'd like potential investors to know about your company and you, and leave them with some final thoughts?
Yeah, I did want to bring up something that we haven't talked about yet, and that is we really do want to be a true triple bottom line company. We talked about making money just now, and that's very important to me and obviously investors. And then we've talked about the environmental part, which is also, I think, very important, certainly to me personally. The third thing that we haven't touched on is the social side of it. And there is a good story there as well. A lot of these areas where there's biomass available that we can use as feedstock, they tend to be more rural, more kind of depressed economically. Probably aren't enough jobs to keep the young people from, fleeing to the cities. So we also want to be part of that solution. So we want to be able to bring good industry, good paying jobs to those areas, and we want to be an active part of those communities too. We want to help train the workers and be active in the community. So we definitely want to be a true triple bottom line company, and we think that'll be good for our bottom line, our financial bottom line as well, to be that way. So I would like to leave that with everybody.
Great. Well, Karl, thanks. We appreciate you taking the time to come answer some questions.
Yeah.
Anyone watching, if you have questions about Netcapital, feel free to email me. My email was in the invite to the webinar here. If you have further questions about Mercurius, I invite you to check out their offering page on Netcapital. There's a discussion board there, and you're welcome to post any additional questions you have there. Karl, thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah. Bye.